of us have been waking up to, in fact, clearer blue skies, the greenery around us, talking about how beautiful nature looks right now, as if nature is really breathing after a very long time and healing itself. So can we really look at these temporary gains from this entire pandemic that India and the world faces collectively today? Can these gains be sustained upon? And what are the challenges that countries like India in particular face, which also actually have 21 of the 30 most polluted cities in the country, in the world? To talk about all of these issues, I'm joined here by a special guest on this broadcast, Erik Solheim. He was the former, in fact, Norwegian Minister for Environment. He's been a career diplomat who's also served as the Under-Secretary General in the United Nations and as the UN, in fact, Environment Program Chief from 2016 to 2018. Erik Solheim, many thanks for finding time from Norway to join us in this important conversation today.
Not at all. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to relate to an Indian audience. India is such an inspiring and incredible place.
In fact, you've also been tweeting about it. Just a short while ago, I saw you tweet about the CO2 levels falling in India, breathing a lot better. We'll come to that. But to begin with you, Erik, when we look at a recent Harvard University study that cautions that there is a direct link between air pollution, between respiratory problems, and COVID-19 mortality. Now, the number of deaths in India have significantly been lower compared to other countries. But at the same time as the country is now looking at lifting of a nationwide lockdown, what are the challenges there, especially for cities that face 10 times more hazardous levels when it comes to the air pollution index?
Let's start at the global level. And I'm really optimistic that we will find a way out of the corona crisis, which is much greener than the way we went into this crisis. And the most important reason for that is very simple. It's the price of coal. Coal is now much more expensive than solar and wind basically everywhere in the world. In the United States, the figures show that there will be a dramatic reduction in coal used during the corona crisis, while at the same time there's an increase in solar and wind. And the electrical companies are turning from coal, which is now much more expensive, into solar and wind to save money. And that when you get the environment drive and the economic drive pointing in the same direction, then we can really make changes happen. And by the way, India has the lowest price of solar anywhere in the world and is playing a key role in the solar revolution.
Absolutely. In fact, India and France have taken that lead role as far as the International Solar Alliance is also concerned. But, when you look at stories about the ozone layer repairing, in context of Australia or the earth healing itself, does it give you hope today?
I think there are three main causes of the pollution in the Indian cities, particularly in the northern Indian cities. One is the road traffic. India needs to move fast into electrical vehicles, electrical buses. Here, India can look to the big neighbor, which it sometimes don't want to look to, which is China. China has 99% of all electrical buses in the world. Some of the big Chinese cities, all buses are electric. And of course, it drastically reduces the pollution from road traffic. And India, of course, can emulate and do the same, hopefully also producing the electrical buses in India so that they're not all imported from China. Secondly, India needs to move very fast on coal, and that started. Prime Minister Modi has really put in place a solar revolution in India, which you should get all credit for. And moving from coal to solar and wind is also very important. And finally, of course, you have the waste for agriculture waste, which is so often burned. That should be a resource for the future. Agriculture waste can be turned into fuel, can be turned into fertilizer, can be turned into so many products. It should not just be wasted, but should be the starting of a circular economy. And if you get all this right, traffic, burning of electricity, and agriculture waste, you will continue to be able to see the Himalayas from Punjab and other parts of northern India.
Well, there have been delightful pictures coming in of mountain ranges that can now be spotted from villages where, in fact, people never thought about having that this would be possible in their lifetime at least. But, you spoke about...
I saw some photo from Jalandhar. I think people said this was the first time in decades they had seen the Himalayas from Jalandhar in Punjab. It's great.
Right. You also spoke about the other Asian big neighbor and how to take, in fact, lessons from them. I will come to the China issue in a bit while. But before that, just to ask you about some practical, in fact, advice that I seek, because you've been an environmental activist for a very long time. One of the things that we also see, the pictures that have been, in fact, emerging are of animals taking to the roads, animals taking to the streets, which is not their natural habitat, but perhaps because the human beings are missing are missing from action. How do you see that challenge playing out as countries start to lift their lockdowns? There have been a substantial decrease in noise pollution, which has been a blessing so far. But what care needs to be taken on that front as we move towards easing out of restrictions?
There has been a fantastic rebound on nature during this crisis. I mean, really fun photos or films from Cape Town in South Africa, where the penguins are walking down the streets. A deer is coming back in streets in Japan. You see bear coming back in streets in Spain. And in India, for instance, you have seen the hatching of an enormous amount of turtles at some of the beaches across India, which in the past, of course, were polluted and crowded, but now the turtles can hatch, and it will have long-term impact on the number of even endangered turtles. Obviously, we all understand that some of these will go back when we come back after the corona crisis, but I think experiencing it, seeing the beauty of it, really feeling nature coming back will inspire us to do more in the future. And in 2021, we're coming together in Kunming in China for the big global conference on nature, and we should be inspired by these rebounds of nature to really set new targets in Kunming for a new deal with nature. This is all over the world. In America, people are speaking about the party of wildlife in the great American national parks, because not disturbed by humans, nature have a party. And we can take a lot of this with us after the corona crisis.
In fact, the noise pollution reduction also applies to marine life. It's not just about land, it's also about water. Because we've seen those reports coming in as well, where, with so much less, in fact, movement across maritime borders, there has been lesser humming in the seas, in the waters. So that's something, one can sustain in some ways. Are there possible options to keep that sustained?
I think there are lots of options to keep it sustained. The trick is to find how humans and wildlife can cohabitate, how we can live together. Obviously, we cannot have a future where humans are subdued to all other species. I mean, humans are the most important species on the planet, but we can live much better together, and we need to find practical solutions. India has also been quite good at some of this. I mean, there is now a very substantial rise in the number of tigers in the Indian national parks. Why is that? Well, better systems have been found for how tigers can live together with the villagers living around the parks. So a lot can be done practically. Hatching of turtles at the beaches, again, find practical solutions so that the turtles can continue to hatch, while humans, of course, can continue to fish and do their activities at the beach.
The other issue, Erik, which I would like, in fact, to, for you to weigh in on, is the issue of medical waste, because coronavirus has brought in the new normal. The way we live our lives, that's completely changed. Even as we work from home, when we step out, there's the issue of sanitation, there's the issue of masks, which has become compulsory. Do you think the issue of responsible, in fact, recycling or disposal of medical waste is going to be a huge concern globally?
Absolutely. This was a big issue before the corona crisis. It's only been exacerbated by the crisis. I mean, look to this enormous beach cleanup in Mumbai, which has been spearheaded by the incredible Afro Shah, and I brought in hundreds of thousands of people to clean the rivers and beaches of Mumbai. Now, of course, to the waste which was there historically, you will also see a huge number of masks and other equipment coming. So yes, indeed, we need to prioritize plastic recycling and recycling of all sorts of medical equipment after the crisis. And the main vehicle here is producer responsibility, extended producer responsibilities. Those companies who bring the plastic and the equipment into the market must also be responsible for financing the recycling of the plastic and other items.
Okay, post the 2008, in fact, financial crisis, we also saw the world and countries like UK, Germany, China put in a huge amount of stimulus towards environmental goals. What kind of structural reforms do you think countries like India need to go in for across multiple sectors and institutions to be able to deal with the new challenges that face us?
I would recommend India to look to one of the most successful models after the financial crisis, which is in a relatively small but still significant Asian neighbor, which is South Korea. South Korea was the most successful nation coming out of the crisis in 2008. They came out faster than any other industrial nations, and that's why and they were have the greenest recovery of other nations. 80% of the recovery of South Korea was made in green sectors, and it helped creating jobs, etc. So look to South Korea for inspiration, and then look to all those areas moving fast into solar and wind. Look to how traffic can be restructured, how nature can produce new jobs, how we can do tree planting. There's any number of areas where going green can create the economic stimulus you need to get out of the crisis. By the way, in the United States, after 2009, President Obama spent $90 billion on energy infrastructure, which was green. And that's the reason why the United States now has decreasing emissions, even if President Trump don't want to do anything.
But do you think, COVID-19 has also brought home the point that even as countries will look inwards, perhaps we might see greater physical border restrictions, but nation states have actually gone borderless when it comes to joining hands and trying to work together to find medical solutions, find environmental solutions. And at such a point in time for a Donald Trump administration that pulled out of a Paris Climate Pact, there needs to be much rethinking about how to coordinate with the global community much better.
Absolutely, and if there is one lesson learned from these crises, is that those nations who tried to prevent the crisis rather than having a laissez-faire attitude, those nations who started getting into lockdown early, and when you said determined, decisive actions from the leaders, they have done much, much better than others. And because we don't know the final outcome yet, but still quite a lot is clear. South Korea has 200 deaths. The United States have 50 times more deaths per capita than South Korea, and by the way, also 50 times more than India. Vietnam has not one single person dead from the corona crisis. So compare this, there are a huge difference. Basically, the East Asian nations, and hopefully also India and South Asia, is the most successful, really containing the virus, while Europe and in particular the United States have done so poorly. This is exactly the opposite of what we have thought before the crisis, when most people thought the United States was well prepared. Well, the United States is now very close to 100,000 dead from coronavirus. Again, 0 in Vietnam, 200 in South Korea, which are also populous countries.
Right. So are you suggesting then that, something like the Paris Climate Pact is something that needs to be back on the table with the full-fledged attention of the United States instead of the Trump administration actually staying away from it? Will that help us in the COVID era?
It will help, but fortunately a lot can be done without the United States in Paris. Prime Minister Modi has taken India on the path to a sustainable future. President Xi in India, Chancellor Merkel or President Macron in Europe. Basically, you need Europe, India and China to lead the world in the absence of American presidential leadership. However, of course, when it comes to the states and when it comes to companies, you see a lot of leadership from the United States also. Think of the fact that, for instance, Microsoft, this huge company, one of the 10 biggest companies in the world, They have promised that they will be carbon neutral by 2030.
You know, it's interesting that you say, Erik, so then that Europe, China, India can actually take a lead role, even if the US has its own set of reluctance when it comes to the global climate pact. But coming to the issue of China, today, the United States NSA Robert O'Brien, and we've seen this back and forth political, in fact, narrative playing out. He said that as many as 5 plagues have come out of China in the last 20 years, and at some point it has to stop, basically holding the country responsible for the origin of the coronavirus pandemic. Is there something you would like to weigh in on this entire concept about, whether it's man-made, it's originating from, the virus is originating from a lab theory, and how China's role, especially in terms of its wildlife its treatment of its wildlife is something that needs to be of concern here?
Yeah, I think there are 2 main aspects to this. I mean, China need to regulate and control the so-called wet markets a lot more than they do, and they need to stop all trade with illegal wildlife. They are onto it. I mean, decisions have been made at the highest political level to do this, and these need to be implemented. Of course, wet markets are not just in China, there are many other parts of the world, but since China is so populous, so big, it carries a lot of weight that they have these wet markets. And there may be a center for infections. But added to that, the mudslinging, which is mainly coming from the United States against China, will bring us nowhere. We need China and the United States to work together, and to work together, of course, with Europe and India and everyone else to find solutions to this. I buy into what Bill Gates has said on this. He said that this mudslinging is distracting us from finding common solutions, and we need to simply get out of it. And the so-called Spanish flu, which is the most deadly flu in all of human history, in all likelihood started in Kansas in the United States. No one has claimed that the United States was to blame for that. So let's simply get out of this mudslinging and find common solutions.
But earlier in the conversation, when you said that China is a country that a lot can be learned from in terms of electric vehicles or the stimulus that they have put in terms of dealing with environmental issues, but they also remain a large international violator. When it comes to polluted rivers going into the seas, these are issues of concern, and especially one of the core issues of debates today is China's increased influence on world bodies, on international global organizations that need to hold the countries accountable. How do you look at this entire conversation?
No, I mean, absolutely. China is, of course, a world power. China and India combined is close to 40% of humanity. If you add Indonesia, these 3 nations alone is 40% of humanity. Obviously, they have a key role to play in global affairs. We are not living in the 19th century where India was under British colonialism and China was in what they consider the decade of humiliation. We are into a future where Asia will dominate the world, where China and India will play key roles. We should welcome it and we should respect it. But of course, with a more important global role also comes responsibilities. We should ask critical questions both to President Xi and to Prime Minister Modi, for sure.
For now, whatever you're hearing from inside of Beijing, from inside of China, in terms of, you just mentioned about the wildlife markets, the wet markets, there have been serious reports of atrocity on wildlife there within the country. Are you assured that right steps will be taken? How really big and serious is the problem involving the wildlife issue there?
Right before the crisis, China made 2 very important decisions which had global ramifications. One was to stop all import of ivory, which had a huge impact in making life better for elephants in Africa because there was less market for ivory, and to stop the import of waste from Europe and the United States. He said, we don't want to be the waste bin of the world and process all this waste. Please take care of it yourself. And after China had done that, by the way, India made the same decision, and Vietnam and other countries in Asia, which will have huge positive global impact. I mean, when the United States, Australia, Europe will have to take care of its own waste. It will also have to be a lot more innovative than these nations are at the moment. And similar decision China need to do to close down wet markets or to regulate wet markets in such a way that they are not a hotbed of diseases.
Okay, so finally, before I end this conversation, Erik, would you like to crystal gaze of how the world now looks in the post-COVID era? You tweeted that interesting video of a robot trying to maintain social distancing in parks in Singapore. How do you really see, this human-animal life balance, the planet Earth sort of reviving itself now going forward?
I think we have a huge chance getting out of this coronavirus crisis to get the world in a better place, less poverty, and taking better care of the environment. There are two counter forces. One is what we have discussed: if the United States and China or other big powers spend their time blaming each other in conflict, it will make every solution more difficult. And if you see internal conflicts in nations, will also make solutions more difficult. And in India, I think it's very important that Hindus don't blame Muslims and Muslims don't blame Hindus for problems, but try to find all Indian solutions which can benefit both Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, all groups. So reducing conflict is key to solutions. But on that basis, we have a great future. India has shown that you can take much better care of tigers and get much more tigers and other wildlife. India has the lowest price of solar anywhere in the world. India has the first all-solar rail station in Assam. There's the first all-solar airport in Kerala. Metro in New Delhi will go solar in the future based on electric solar power from Madhya Pradesh. So there is such a lot of positive happening. We can avoid conflicts. We can focus on the joint humanity where we solve all these problems together.
Okay, so that's in fact a positive message, and let's just hope that the international community can collectively each play its responsibility, join hands to ensure that as we start to come hopefully out of COVID-19, that we continue to remain in fact in a position where we are able to flatten the curve, make sure that the mortality rates are down, but also at the same time, when livelihoods are back, along with the safety of lives, it is not at the cost of planet Earth. And the way the Earth has been reviving and healing itself. Many thanks, Erik Solheim, for joining us, for finding us time in this conversation today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure talking to you, in fact, the former UN Chief for the Environment Program. You're in New Delhi. For ETV Bharat, this is Smita Sharma.